She would later understand that nothing about that night was accidental. Not the rain. Not the failed translation. Not the elevator that opened on the 38th floor at the exact moment the room was about to break. None of it. But that understanding would come later, when she had enough distance to see the shape of things. On the night itself, she only knew what was in front of her. A room full of men on the edge of something irreversible, and a silence that had already lasted too long. His name was Kim Ji-Hoon. She didn't know it yet, not fully. She knew the name from a briefing document the way you know a city from a map. Flat. Theoretical. The document said, Korean Delegation Lead. Regional Expansion Initiative. It did not say what the room said the moment she walked in. It did not say, this man has never needed to raise his voice because the world has always gone quiet around him first. He stood at the center of that glass-walled conference room the way certain structures stand, not because they are the tallest, but because everything else orients around them. 42 floors of steel and money beneath his feet. 3 governments with his private number saved in their systems. An underworld so vast and so silent that most people who benefited from it never knew his name. And yet, he was watching a room fall apart and doing nothing. Not because he couldn't stop it. Because he was waiting for something, someone, he didn't know he was waiting for. She walked to the center of the room. She spoke in Yoruba first. Then Korean. Then English, smooth, unaccented, unhurried. She did not perform. She did not negotiate. She simply told the truth in every language available to her until the room had no choice but to listen. The Nigerian elder's jaw unclenched. The Korean aide stopped sweating. The air shifted. And Ji-Hoon's eyes, those still, slow-moving eyes, found her and did not move again. What he felt in that moment, he would never say. Not then. Not for a long time. But I will tell you, because I am telling this story from the other side of everything that happened. He felt something loosen. One small thing. One thread of the armor he had been building since he was 19 years old and learned that trust was just a slower way of being destroyed. One thread. She didn't know. She was already moving, smoothing her Accra-trimmed blazer, capping her pen, being professional, being capable, being everything the room needed her to be. She had spent her whole life being what rooms needed. She did not yet know that somewhere, 12 floors below, in a black sedan with tinted windows, a man was lifting a camera. And that the photograph he took that night would, in 7 days, nearly kill her. If you believe in stories about people who changed, not because life was kind to them, but because one person refused to give up on them, then stay. Subscribe. Because this is one of those stories. And it's only just beginning. The meeting ended. The hands were shaken. Safiya stood in the corridor making notes in her leather journal, old habit, older than any job she'd ever held, when she heard the footsteps stop beside her. She knew without looking. The specific weight of that silence was already becoming recognizable. You suggested the tea, Ji-Hoon said. She looked up. His security detail stood 15 feet behind him. She noted the distance, not close enough to hear, far enough to pretend they weren't watching. Deliberate. Everything about this man was deliberate. Chief Okafor's family is from Enugu, she said. Sharing food after conflict is a gesture. It mattered. It worked. This time. He studied her the way people study things they cannot immediately classify. She was used to this. Had been used to it her whole life. Being the person who didn't fit the expected category. Ghanaian passport, Nigerian work authorization, Korean vocabulary, UN field experience. She existed in the spaces between definitions, and the world never quite knew where to file her. She had learned to find power in that. How much, he said finally, would it cost to keep you? The word keep did something complicated in her chest. That depends on what you mean. Professionally. Then it depends on your timeline, your risk tolerance, and whether your team can accept correction from someone without a weapon. The corner of his mouth moved. Fractional. She filed it. What she did not know, what she could not have known, was that 9 years earlier, a woman matching her description had pulled a young man from a flooded drainage channel behind a Lagos market during a storm and performed chest compressions until he breathed again. The woman had disappeared before anyone could ask her name. The young man had been Ji-Hoon's younger brother. Ji-Hoon had spent 4 years looking for her. He had stopped looking 2 years ago. He was looking at her now. "Tomorrow," he said. 9 a.m. "I'll have a contract prepared." He turned to leave. "Mr. Kim," she said. He stopped. She told him about names. About what it means, in this part of the world, to know someone's name versus what they've told you. He was quiet for a long moment. "Kim Ji-Hoon," he said. Not as introduction. As offering. She nodded once. Walked away first. She did not look back. 3 floors down, in the building's east stairwell, a man pressed send on a photograph, and copied it to an address in Seoul that belonged to people who considered Kim Ji-Hoon's expanding influence a problem they intended to solve. There are things families decide before you are old enough to refuse them. Ji-Hoon had known this since he was 7 years old, sitting in a Seoul dining room while his father explained, calmly and without cruelty, that their family did not make choices, they honored them. That the Kim name was not a name. It was a structure. And structures did not bend for feeling. He had believed that. For 34 years, he had believed it without question. Then Safiya walked into an Accra ceremony and spoke to an elder woman in Chi, her mother's language, she had said quietly, almost to herself, and something in the way she said it made his chest do something it had no business doing. The welcoming ceremony had been arranged at her recommendation. Traditional Akan protocol, Kent cloth displayed, schnapps offered to the elders first, no business discussed before relationship was acknowledged. She had briefed the entire delegation that morning. 3 of his men had half listened. One had nodded at the wrong moment, reached toward a sacred ceremonial object with his left hand, the wrong hand, and the Asante family's lead elder had gone very still. The room had shifted the way rooms shift before something breaks. Safiya had moved without hesitation. She crossed to the elder, lowered herself respectfully, and began to speak. Not translating. Not consulting. Genuinely speaking, woman to woman, in a language that carried her childhood inside it. Ji-Hoon had watched her become someone else entirely. Not smaller. Larger. More real. The elder had listened. Then responded. Then, slowly, smiled. The deal survived. Afterward, in the corridor, his phone had rung. Seoul. His uncle, director Kim Sung-pyo, the man who had managed the family's political alliances for 20 years. "I've heard you've acquired a translator," his uncle said. "African woman. No family connections. No background our people can verify." "She's a consultant," Ji-Hoon said. "She was seen at your side for 6 hours yesterday." A pause waited with everything Korean patriarchal tradition had ever constructed. "Your father's council meets Friday. The Shin family has made their position clear. Ji-Hoon, do not complicate what is already decided." The line went dead. Ji-Hoon stood in the corridor. Through the glass wall, he could see Safiya, laughing now, genuinely, at something the elder's granddaughter had said, her whole face changed by it. He put his phone in his pocket. He did not go back inside. He stood there and felt, for the first time in years, the exact shape of something he was not allowed to want. She found the note at 1:09 a.m. Slipped beneath her hotel room door. No envelope. A single folded page, cream paper, handwritten in Igbo, the letters precise and unhurried, as though whoever wrote them had all the time in the world and wanted her to know it. "You are in a burning building, Ms. Mensah. I'm offering you a door." Below it, her immigration file number. Her mother's address in Kumasi. A meeting time, 6 a.m., a restaurant 2 streets away. She sat on the edge of the bed and read it 4 times. Then she picked up her journal. Opened it. Wrote nothing. Closed it. She thought about her mother, a seamstress in Kumasi who still called her every Sunday and asked when she was coming home, who kept a photograph of Safiya's university graduation on the wall beside the window and had never once asked her to be smaller than she was. She thought about what it meant that someone knew her mother's address. She thought about Ji-Hoon. At 2:17 a.m., she knocked on his door. He opened it immediately, as though he hadn't been sleeping either. He looked at her face first. Then at the paper in her hand. He took it. Read it. His expression moved through 3 distinct phases in under 4 seconds. recognition, calculation, something harder to name. He knows your Igbo, Ji-Hoon said. And my mother's address. Silence. You came to me, he said. I made a choice. He looked at her for a long moment, and she understood that this was not simple for him. That trust, for this man, was not a door you walked through. It was a wall you'd been building for years, and she was standing on the wrong side of it, asking him to look for a handle. He folded the note. I'll have Taisuk outside your room before dawn, he said. Ji-Hoon. His given name. She hadn't planned it. Your uncle called you today. I saw your face after. The air changed. What do you know about my uncle? He asked quietly. Nothing, she said. That's what worries me. He said nothing. But his jaw worked once, that single degree of tension she was learning to read, and she understood. Whatever his family had decided in Seoul, it had already arrived in Accra. And it was not going to wait for her to be ready. There is a specific kind of man who builds walls so well he forgets doors were ever an option. Kim Ji-Hoon had been that man for 15 years. And for 15 years, it had worked. The walls held. The empire grew. The silence around him deepened into something that passed, in certain circles, for respect. Though fear and respect wear the same coat in the underworld, and most people never check the lining. He had stopped checking a long time ago. The call came at 11:47 p.m. Not to Ji-Hoon. To Safiya, through an anonymous number, a voice she didn't recognize, directing her to a warehouse address 2 streets from the hotel. A man bleeding. Her NGO field medicine credentials listed on a registry she had forgotten she was still active on. The voice said, "You are the closest. He will not survive until morning." She went. This is the part people find difficult to understand, that she went alone, without telling anyone, into a Lagos warehouse in the middle of the night, because there was a person bleeding and she knew how to help. They want there to be a more complicated reason. There isn't. Safiya Mensah had spent 3 years in conflict zones learning that the moment you start calculating whether someone deserves saving is the moment you lose the part of yourself worth keeping. She found him on the floor of the warehouse's back room, a man she didn't recognize, mid-40s, a wound in his left side that had been bleeding for too long. She worked without speaking. Gloves from her bag. Pressure. Assessment. The wound was deep but had missed everything critical. She had seen worse in Yemen. She focused. She did not hear the door open behind her. Step away from him. Ji-Hoon's voice. She didn't step away. She didn't turn. If I release this pressure, he bleeds out in 4 minutes. So unless you're a surgeon, I need you to either help me or be quiet. A long silence. Then, who is he? She pressed harder against the wound. The man beneath her hands was fading in and out, his breathing shallow but present. I don't know. I was called. He was bleeding. That's all I needed. She heard Ji-Hoon move closer. Heard him crouch beside her. Heard something shift in his breathing, a small, involuntary sound, almost nothing, that she would think about later. Because the man on the floor was Park Sung-jin. His rival. His enemy. The man whose network had been competing with his West Africa expansion for 8 months. Ji-Hoon's hand moved toward his jacket. Safiya looked up at him for the first time. Don't, she said. Quiet. Absolute. I know what he is. I know what you're thinking. And I'm telling you, if you do this, you become something you cannot come back from. His hand stopped. His eyes, those careful, constructed eyes, looked at her with something raw moving behind them. Something that didn't have a name in the language he'd built his life in. He was 7 years old again, suddenly, sitting in a hospital corridor while his father made a phone call instead of coming inside. Learning, in that moment, that power and presence were not the same thing. That a man could own everything and still leave the room when it mattered most. He had promised himself he would never be that man. He looked at his hand. Then at her. Then he took his hand away from his jacket and said, "Tell me what you need." He was a man who had forgotten that strength and softness could live in the same body, until she showed him. If this story is reaching something in you, something about people who almost became their worst selves, but didn't, then you already know why this channel exists. Subscribe. Because every week, We tell the stories the world doesn't tell enough, about love that costs something. About people who choose better, even when it's hard. You're not just watching. You're remembering something true. Park Sung-jin survived. They didn't speak of it, not immediately. Ji-Hoon's men arrived within minutes and took the rival away to somewhere Safiya chose not to ask about. The warehouse was cleared. The night closed over what had happened the way water closes over a stone. Ji-Hoon took her to a safe house rather than back to the hotel. She didn't argue. She understood the logic. Her location had been known, her credentials used without her consent, and whoever arranged it was not finished. The safe house was quiet. Spare. A dining table, 2 chairs, a window overlooking a street where ordinary life continued without them. Saturday. She opened her journal. He sat across from her and said nothing for a long time. This was new for her, a man comfortable enough in silence that he didn't feel the need to fill it. Most powerful men she had encountered performed constantly. Presence, authority, volume, their power was a show. Ji-Hoon's was something else. It was interior. Structural. It was also, she was beginning to understand, a prison. Where did you learn that? He said finally. Eastern DRC. Then Yemen. She didn't look up from her journal. 3 years of watching people die from wounds that weren't fatal. I decided to learn. You went alone tonight. Yes. You could have been killed. Yes. That doesn't seem to concern you. She looked up then. Met his eyes directly. It concerns me, she said. I just don't let it make decisions for me. He was quiet again. Outside, a generator hummed to life somewhere down the street. My men found something, he said finally. Before they arrived at the warehouse. He slid his phone across the table. A photograph on the screen, taken from outside the warehouse. Her face. His face. Park Sung-jin between them. Already time-stamped. Already sent. Someone arranged tonight, he said. All of it. She looked at the photograph for a long time. I know, she said. He looked at her sharply. I've been mapping it since Accra, she said. Ji-Hoon. His name, deliberate. The person who built this situation, I don't think they're your enemy. A pause. I think they're yours. She found it by accident. That was the thing about secrets in powerful organizations. They weren't always buried. Sometimes they were simply placed where no one thought to look, because the people who put them there had stopped believing anyone around them was paying attention. Safiya had always been paying attention. It was 6 a.m. in Nairobi, 2 hours before the consortium meeting with Mama Wanjiru's family. She was reviewing the briefing documents Ji-Hoon's team had prepared. Trade figures, projected revenue, expansion timelines. Standard material. She read everything twice. Old habit from the UN years, where the difference between what a document said and what it meant had once saved 4 lives in a Yemeni border town. On the 3rd page of the shipping appendix, buried inside a footnote, was a port code. She recognized it. Not from Ji-Hoon's operation. From a field report she had translated 14 months earlier for an independent trade monitoring body. A report flagging irregular cargo movements through a specific East African port. Movements that the monitoring body had quietly handed to Interpol. The port code in Ji-Hoon's document was identical. She sat with that for a long time. Then she closed the document. Opened her journal. Wrote nothing. Closed it. She thought about the man she had watched choose, in a Lagos warehouse, to take his hand away from his weapon. She thought about what that cost someone built the way he was built. She thought about the port code. The consortium meeting went well. Mama Wanjiru, a woman who had buried a son and built a business empire in the same decade, studied Safiya across a low table with the particular attention of someone who recognized a certain kind of survival. When Safiya spoke, she listened completely. When the elder finally agreed to sign, she reached across and briefly pressed Safiya's hand. You have carried things, Mama Wanjiru said quietly in Kikuyu. It shows. In a good way. Safiya nodded once. Did not trust herself to speak. Afterward, walking back through the Westlands district, she became aware, precisely, professionally, that she was being followed. The man behind her had corrected his direction 3 times in 4 minutes. She did not reach for her phone. She did not change her pace. She turned into the Maasai market, vast, crowded, layered with noise and color and the overlapping vocabularies of a dozen transactions happening simultaneously, and she moved through it the way she moved through language. Like someone who understood that the structure others found chaotic was, to her, perfectly readable. She emerged on the opposite side alone. She called Taisuk, gave the description, said, "Don't hurt him if you don't have to. His following orders." A pause on the line. Then, "Whose?" "That," she said, "is what I need you to find out." She hung up. She stood on the Nairobi street in the early afternoon light and thought about a port code in a footnote and a man who had almost pulled a trigger and didn't. She thought, I need to know which version of him built that shipping route. Because one version she could work with. The other would change everything. Han Jae-won arrived from Seoul on a Tuesday. Safiya noticed 3 things about him immediately. He smiled too quickly, he watched Ji-Hoon the way people watch something they are measuring rather than something they respect, and he had brought 2 men whose function was described as security but whose attention moved in the wrong direction, not outward, toward threat, but inward, toward Ji-Hoon himself. She said nothing. She filed it. The announcement came that evening, formally, over dinner, with the specific ceremony the Kim family apparently applied to all decisions that had already been made before they were presented as discussions. Ji-Hoon would marry Shin Yura, daughter of Shin Dae-jung. The alliance would stabilize the council's eastern operations and provide political cover for the West Africa expansion. The wedding was scheduled within 60 days. Ji-Hoon received this information without visible reaction. Safiya received it the same way. After dinner, she sat in her room and opened her laptop. She pulled up everything publicly available on the Shin family, which was very little, and everything available through the trade monitoring databases she still had access to. What she found took her 40 minutes to understand and approximately 4 seconds to feel the full weight of. The Shin family's eastern operations ran through a logistics company registered in Busan. That company had 2 subsidiary partners in West Africa. One of them used the same port code she had found in Ji-Hoon's shipping appendix. She sat back. The rival she had saved, Park Sung-jin, had not arrived in West Africa by accident. Someone had funded his network's expansion into exactly the territories Ji-Hoon was now entering. She pulled up the subsidiary's registration documents. The signatory on the founding paperwork was not Shin Dae-jung. It was Han Jae-won, Ji-Hoon's second-in-command. The man who had just arrived from Seoul carrying news of a marriage alliance with the very family funding his rival. She closed the laptop. She looked at the wall. She thought, he doesn't know. Then, with the specific chill of a realization arriving a moment too late. Or he does. And that is worse. There are decisions that don't announce themselves as decisions. They arrive dressed as something smaller, a pause, a silence, a moment where you choose not to speak. And it is only later, when you are standing in the wreckage of what that silence built, that you understand, you chose. You simply chose quietly enough to pretend you didn't. Ji-Hoon had been making quiet choices for 15 years. The council convened on a Wednesday morning in the lower level of a private building in Victoria Island, a room with no windows and furniture that suggested permanence. 12 men. 3 of whom Safiya recognized from the Lagos negotiations. 9 of whom she had never seen, which told her they had never needed to be seen. The photograph was placed on the table. Her hands on Park Sung-jin's chest. Her face angled downward, focused, professional. His face visible beneath her. The timestamp placing her at the warehouse 40 minutes before Ji-Hoon's men arrived. The elder who presented it, a man named Chairman Woo, 70s, voice like gravel wrapped in silk, said, she was his contact before Lagos. The treatment was arranged. She kept him alive for a purpose. 3 voices rose immediately. 2 called for her removal from the operation. 1 called for something that didn't need to be said clearly to be understood completely. Safiya sat across the table and felt the room the way she felt languages. Not just the words, but the structure beneath them. The grammar of what was actually being said. She looked at Ji-Hoon. He was looking at the photograph. He did not look up. She understood, with a clarity that arrived like cold water, that he was calculating. That somewhere inside the architecture of everything he had built, she was being weighed. Her value against his stability. Her life against his position. She had known this was possible. Knowing it did not make it smaller. Chairman Wu turned to Ji-Hoon. Your response? Ji-Hoon was quiet for a long moment. Then, the investigation is not complete. No verdict without complete evidence. It was not a defense. It was a delay. She understood the difference. That night, alone in the safe house, she opened her journal and built the map she had been assembling since Accra. Every name, every date, every port code, every moment that had felt like coincidence and wasn't. The lines converged. The picture formed. She stared at it for a very long time. Then she wrote, in her private language, the two names at the center of everything. One of them was Han Jae-won. The other was a ghost, a decision made 3 years ago, by a man who hadn't understood yet what it would cost someone else. She kept giving. He kept doubting. And somewhere between his silence and her sacrifice, a conscience was being rebuilt from the ground up. If that kind of story reaches something in you, something about people who love others more carefully than they love themselves, then you know why we're here. Subscribe. Because this community was built for people who feel stories, not just watch them. And this one is far from over. Let me tell you what Kim Ji-Hoon has never told anyone. 7 years ago, he trusted a man named Choi. Not easily. Ji-Hoon had never done anything easily. But Choi had been beside him for 6 years, through 3 council wars and 2 international expansions, and there is a specific erosion that happens to even the most guarded person when someone shows up, consistently, in the dark. You begin, without deciding to believe in them. Ji-Hoon gave Choi his family's location during a council conflict that had become dangerous enough to require moving them. A safe house in Incheon. 3 people, his mother, his aunt, his younger brother Soo-Hyun, 22 years old, studying architecture, who had never wanted anything to do with the empire and said so often and without apology. Choi sold the location. Not to an enemy. To a competing faction within the council itself. Men who wanted leverage, not destruction. They hadn't intended to hurt anyone. Soo-Hyun had simply been in the wrong room when the message was delivered physically rather than digitally. A mistake, they said afterward. An accident. Ji-Hoon had rebuilt his empire on the grave of that accident. And he had never trusted anyone again. Now he sat across from Safiya in the safe house at 2 a.m., and she slid her journal across the table. Open to a page covered in a script he couldn't read, with 2 names written in Korean at the bottom because she had written them for him. Han Jae-won. And below it, a reference number. A council vote. 3 years old. His own vote, approving a territorial expansion that had, without his knowledge, pushed Park Sung-jin's network directly into West Africa. The funding trail, which she had followed from the port code through the Busan subsidiary to Han Jae-won's signature, showed that Jae-won had been quietly financing Sung-jin's counter-expansion ever since. Using it as leverage. A controlled rival. A problem Ji-Hoon would always need Jae-won to help manage. Ji-Hoon read the page twice. Then he stood. Walked to the window. Stood with his back to her. Outside, Lagos continued, indifferent, enormous, alive with the business of people who had no idea what was happening in this room. You built this map, he said. From what? From paying attention, she said. From being the person in the room everyone forgets is listening. A long silence. The rival you saved, he said slowly. I put him in your path. Not deliberately. But the vote I cast, the decision I made 3 years ago, it created the situation that brought him to that warehouse. That brought you to that warehouse. Yes, she said. Which means the photograph was always going to exist, she said. Someone just needed to wait for the right moment to use it. He turned around. She had expected many things from this moment. Denial, deflection, the specific coldness he deployed when information threatened his control. She had not expected what she saw. His face was open. Not soft. Ji-Hoon's face didn't do soft. But the construction was down. The careful architecture of composure that he wore like a second skin had, in this moment, simply stopped. He looked like a man who had just understood something about himself that he could not unfind. "I created this," he said. "Parts of it," she said carefully. "Without knowing." "That doesn't." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." She reached across the table and closed the journal. "But it changes what we do next," she said. "If you're willing." He looked at her hands on the journal. At her face. At the woman who had mapped his empires unraveling from a Lagos safe house at 2 a.m, not to destroy him. To save him. "What do you need from me?" he asked. It was the first time he had ever asked that question. Of anyone. She recognized the weight of it. Received it carefully. "The truth," she said. "All of it. From the beginning." He sat back down. And for the first time in 15 years, Kim Ji-Hoon began to speak, not to manage a situation, not to control a room, but because someone was finally asking the right question. And he was, at enormous cost to everything he had built himself to be, choosing to answer. The council chamber was built to make people feel small. That was its function. The low ceiling, the stone table, the single overhead light positioned to illuminate whoever sat at the center and leave everything else in peripheral darkness. Ji-Hoon had sat at the head of this room for 9 years. He had designed it himself. He understood, better than anyone, exactly what it was built to do. He had not considered, until this moment, that it would one day do it to someone he cared about. Safiya stood at the center of the table. She had not been told it was a trial. She had been told it was a debriefing, standard procedure following the Nairobi operation. She had dressed accordingly, professional, composed, her Accra-trimmed blazer because she always wore it when she needed to remember who she was before any room tried to tell her differently. Chairman Wu placed the photograph on the table. Then he placed a second document beside it, her immigration file, the flagged status, the collapsed timeline. As of this morning, her work authorization had been formally suspended. Someone had purchased access inside the Nigerian Immigration Service and moved the machinery against her. She looked at the document. Then at Ji-Hoon. He was looking at the table. "The evidence is clear," Chairman Wu said. She maintained contact with Park Sung-jin prior to Lagos. She preserved his life against the organization's interest. She has no legal standing in this country. She is a liability the council is no longer willing to carry. 2 voices rose. Then 3. Safiya opened her mouth. Ji-Hoon's voice came quietly across the table. Not loud. It never needed to be loud. "If you speak again, I will be forced to kill you myself." The room went absolutely still. She looked at him, directly, completely, and in the space of one breath she understood 2 simultaneous and contradictory things, that he was threatening her, and that he was protecting her. That his silence was a weapon he was turning outward, not inward. That the council would hear a man in control of his asset. That control, in this room, was the only language that kept her alive. She closed her mouth. She did not look away from him. He held her gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Something moved behind his eyes, fast, compressed, the way lightning moves inside a cloud before anyone sees it. Then he turned to Chairman Wu. "The investigation," Ji-Hoon said, "is not complete. What you have presented is a sequence of events. It is not a cause. I will not render a verdict on incomplete intelligence. That is not how this council has ever operated under my leadership." Chairman Wu's eyes narrowed. "Your leadership is precisely what this council is currently evaluating, Ji-Hoon." The room shifted. Because that was the thing that had not yet been said openly, the inheritance question, the succession that 3 senior council members had been quietly maneuvering toward for 8 months. Ji-Hoon's West Africa expansion had divided the council. His severance of the Shin marriage alliance had fractured it further. And now, with a controversial foreign consultant at the center of a treason accusation, the fracture had become something that people were beginning to measure for width. Han Jae-won sat at the far end of the table and said nothing. He was smiling at his hands. Safiya saw it. She filed it. She said nothing. And in the silence of everything she swallowed in that room, she built the last piece of the map she had been constructing since Accra. The piece that showed her, finally and completely, who had built this situation from the beginning and why. The verdict was suspended pending further investigation. In the elevator afterward, alone, Ji-Hoon stood beside her without touching her. The doors closed. He said, without looking at her, "You didn't speak." "You asked me not to," she said. "I didn't ask." "No," she said. "You didn't." The elevator moved upward. Neither of them spoke again. But she was shaking, finely, controlled, invisible to anyone who didn't know what composed people looked like when they were holding themselves together by will alone. He knew. He said nothing. And that, the knowing and the silence both, was its own kind of betrayal and its own kind of care, wrapped so tightly together she couldn't find where one ended and the other began. He came to her room at midnight. No security. No Tae-suk positioned in the corridor. Just Ji-Hoon, standing in the doorway in a white shirt with the collar open, looking, for the first time since she had known him, like a man who had put something down and wasn't sure he could pick it back up. She stepped aside. He came in. He sat at the small table by the window. She remained standing, not defensively, just because she needed to be able to move. Needed to feel like the room had more than one option in it. "Han Jae-won," he said. "Yes. You've known since Nairobi." "Since Accra," she said. "I was certain by Nairobi." He absorbed that. The timeline of it, how long she had carried the information, how many moments she'd had to use it differently, and hadn't. "Why didn't you go to Tae-suk?" "Because Tae-suk is loyal to you," she said. "And I didn't know yet if loyalty to you meant protecting what you'd built or protecting who you were. Those aren't always the same thing." He looked up at her. There are moments that exist outside of the normal rhythm of things. Moments where time doesn't stop exactly, but deepens. Becomes more itself. This was one of them. "I should have defended you," he said. "Yes." "In the council. I should have." "Yes," she said again. Not cruelly. Just completely. He leaned forward. Put his face in his hands. And she understood she was witnessing something that Kim Ji-Hoon had not shown another living person in 15 years. The specific collapse of a man who had held himself together through discipline alone for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to put the discipline down. She crossed the room. She sat across from him. She did not touch him. She did not perform comfort. She simply placed herself in the same space as his pain and stayed there. The way she had stayed in conflict zones, in hospital corridors, in rooms full of people who needed someone to remain present when everything else was leaving. After a long time, he lifted his face. "I built this," he said. "All of it. J1. The shipping route. The situation that put you in that warehouse. I built it without knowing, but I built it." "Yes," she said. "And you still came to warn me. About the Shin family's team. About all of it." "Yes." "Why?" She looked at him, this man who had threatened her life in front of 12 people to save it, who had spent 15 years building walls so well he'd forgotten windows existed, who was sitting across from her now with his face open and his hands empty. "Because," she said quietly, "I don't think you're what you built. I think you're what you do next." He was still for a long time. Then he reached across the table, slowly, deliberately, giving her every opportunity to move, and placed his hand over hers. She didn't move. Outside, Lagos breathed and hummed and continued being enormous and indifferent and alive. Inside, something small and necessary and very fragile had been placed between them. Neither of them moved to protect it. Neither of them moved away. And for now, uncertain, unresolved, built on the rubble of everything that had nearly destroyed them both, that was enough. Control, Ji-Hoon had always believed, was not something you held. It was something you maintained, constantly, quietly, through the accumulated weight of decisions made correctly over time. Lose enough of those decisions, and control didn't disappear dramatically. It simply stopped being yours. He understood this on a Thursday morning in Lagos when Shin Yura walked into his private floor at Meridian Tower unannounced and sat down across from him with the composure of someone who had never once needed an invitation to be anywhere. She was not what he had prepared for. He had prepared for her father's aggression, the transactional brutality of Shin Dae-jung, who treated alliances the way other men treated receipts. Useful until settled, disposable after. He had not prepared for Shin Yura herself, 31, composed, with eyes that moved through a room the way Safiya's did. Like someone who understood that observation was its own form of power. "I know you ended the arrangement," she said. No preamble. "My father is managing his response. You have perhaps 72 hours before that response becomes structural." Ji-Hoon said nothing. "I'm not here about the arrangement," she said. "I'm here about Ms. Mensah." The air in the room changed. Her immigration status was suspended using a contact inside the Nigerian Immigration Service, Shin Yura continued. That contact was activated through a financial account registered to a shell company in Busan. The same account that funds Han Jae-won's private operations. She slid a document across the desk. Ji-Hoon looked at it. Then at her. "Why are you giving me this?" Shin Yura was quiet for a moment. Then, "Because I was told my entire life that the Kim family builds empires. I came here expecting to meet someone who deserved one." She stood. Smoothed her jacket. "Ms. Mensah is the reason your West Africa operation still exists. My father's team was in Nairobi. She removed them without violence, without exposure, and without asking you for permission." A pause. "I suggest you understand what you have before my father makes the decision for you." She left without looking back. Ji-Hoon sat alone with the document. He thought about a woman who walked into burning rooms and came out carrying the people inside them. He thought, "I'm running out of time to deserve that." She was packing when he found her. Not dramatically. No swept surfaces, no scattered clothing. Safiya packed the way she did everything. Methodically, completely, with the particular efficiency of someone who had learned never to leave anything behind that mattered and never to carry anything that didn't. Her leather journal was already in the bag. Ji-Hoon stood in the doorway and felt something he had not felt since he was 19 years old and standing outside a hospital room, the specific helplessness of arriving at a moment you caused, too late to prevent it, with nothing in your hands that fixes anything. "Where?" he said. "I don't know yet." She didn't stop packing. "Somewhere my immigration status isn't a weapon someone else can pick up. I'm having it resolved." "I know." She folded a blazer, the Accra-trimmed one. "Taisuk told me. You used 3 council favors and a financial guarantee to fast-track the appeal." She placed it in the bag. "You didn't tell me yourself." The silence that followed had weight. "I didn't want you to feel managed," she said. "Not cruel. Precise." He stepped into the room. "That's not what I..." Ji-Hoon. She stopped. Turned. Faced him completely, and this was the thing about Safiya Mensah that no room had ever fully prepared him for. She did not perform anger. She did not perform hurt. She simply stood in the full truth of what she felt and made it available, without armor, without strategy. "You spent 2 weeks watching me give everything I had to keep your empire standing. Your deal. Your counsel. Your life, in Nairobi." Her voice was steady. "And when it was over, you handled my problem like an operation. Not like a person." He had no answer. Because she was right. Not partially. Completely. "I don't know how to do this," he said finally. The most honest sentence he owned. "I know," she said. "Tell me how." She looked at him, this man who commanded silence in every room he entered, asking her, quietly, to teach him something his entire life had been structured to prevent him from learning. She said, "Start by asking me to stay. Not because you need me. Because you want me here." The distinction hung between them like something irreversible. He opened his mouth. His phone rang. Taisuk. One word when he answered, "Counsel." Ji-Hoon looked at Safiya. At her bag. At the journal already packed inside it. He made a decision. He put the phone in his pocket without answering. "Stay," he said. "Not because I need you." A breath. "Because without you in this room, I become someone I've already decided I don't want to be." Her hands were still on the bag. Outside the window, 3 black vehicles had appeared on the street below. Neither of them had noticed yet. The rooftop was 42 floors above everything. That was the thing about height, it didn't remove you from the world. It just gave you enough distance to see its shape. Lagos spread beneath them in every direction. Lights and generators and the particular energy of a city that had decided, collectively, to refuse stillness. The storm that had been building since afternoon finally arrived, not gently. The way Safiya had once noticed rain never arrived gently in this city. It came with intention. Heavy. Deliberate. She was standing at the edge of the rooftop when Ji-Hoon came through the door. He had come from the council. She could tell by the set of his shoulders, that specific compression that meant he had been in a room full of people demanding things and had given none of them what they wanted. His white shirt was dark at the collar from the rain. He hadn't bothered with a jacket. He stood beside her. Neither of them spoke immediately. Below, she knew, 3 council factions were fracturing in real time. Han Jae-won's full betrayal had been presented to the remaining senior members 2 hours ago. The shipping accounts, the Busan subsidiary, the purchased immigration contact, the manufactured photograph. The evidence was complete. Tae-suk had handled the physical components of Jae-won's removal with the quiet efficiency that made him extraordinary at his function. It was finished. And it had cost Ji-Hoon the Eastern Alliance, 2 senior council seats, and the political cover the Shin arrangement would have provided. The traditional factions in Seoul, men his father's age who believed the Kim name required a Korean wife, Korean heirs, Korean silence, had already begun their own maneuvering. He had known this would happen. He had made the choice anyway. It's done, he said. I know, she said. Rain moved across the rooftop in slow sheets. Neither of them moved from it. The Seoul faction will push for a formal leadership review, he said. Within 30 days. They have the numbers if 2 more council members move against me. He paused. They will move. Yes, she said. I have perhaps 3 weeks before this becomes something I cannot manage from inside the organization. He turned to look at her profile, the rain on her face, her eyes on the city, the absolute stillness she carried that he had spent weeks trying to understand and finally had. It wasn't distance. It was depth. She was always fully present. He had simply never been in a room that could hold that before. I need you to understand what choosing to stay in this, means. She turned to face him. I saved your enemy, she said. I was accused of treason. My immigration status was used as a weapon. I was threatened in a council chamber by the man she stopped. Started again. I have been in this from the beginning, Ji-Hoon. Don't explain the cost to me. He was quiet. Then, I trust you. She looked at him for a long time. Searched his face, not for deception, she was past that. For readiness. For whether the man standing in front of her had actually arrived at this moment or was simply standing at the edge of it. The way people stand at the edge of things they intend to step back from. She found what she was looking for. Not certainty. Certainty was a construction, and she knew better than to want it. What she found was something older and more reliable, a man who had dismantled 15 years of protective architecture and was standing in the rain without it, asking her to see him. I know, she said. She had known for a while. He reached out, slowly, the way he did everything that mattered, and took her hand. Not a gesture. A decision. His thumb moved once across her knuckles, and she felt the weight of everything it carried. The guilt of what he had built, the grief of what it had cost, the specific exhaustion of a man who had been powerful for so long he had forgotten what it felt like to simply be present in a moment without managing it. She held his hand back. Below them, Lagos breathed. Above them, the storm continued, indifferent to empires, indifferent to councils and alliances and the ancient machinery of men who believed power was something you could own rather than something you were temporarily trusted with. On the street 42 floors down, 2 vehicles had been parked for 11 minutes. Their occupants had not moved. They were not Ji-Hoon's men. They were not Tae-suk's. They were patient, the particular patience of people who had decided the outcome already and were simply waiting for the correct moment. Ji-Hoon and Safiya stood on the rooftop above all of it, hand in hand in the Lagos rain, 2 people who had found each other inside a war neither of them had started, and for this one moment, they were simply that. 2 people. A choice. The rain. The danger below them was real. It was also, for 11 more minutes, still arriving. And in those 11 minutes, something that had been broken for a very long time, in him and in her, in different ways and for different reasons, was quietly, impermanently, and with full knowledge of everything still coming. Healing. If this story touched you, even a little, then you already belong here. Mafia romance, especially interracial and cross-cultural love stories, aren't just drama. They're about trust, sacrifice, and choosing love when it's hardest. Subscribing isn't just supporting a channel. It's supporting stories that show love can survive power, prejudice, and fear. And if you made it to the end, you're not just a viewer anymore. You're part of this story.